this video, we are going to be talking about extended group by clauses. The four extensions for group by that we're going to be talking about are rollup, cube, the grouping function, and the grouping sets extension. So our rollup operator extends group by to include the results of the aggregate function not only for the groups, but for the entire set of data that you would see regardless of the groups. So in this case, we have our regular group by where we're selecting our department name and the sum of all salaries for individuals in that department. And then we're grouping that by department name to see basically how expensive each department is. Now, if we add to our group by this word rollup, we're going to get the exact same output that we got from our group by, but then we're also going to get this one additional tuple that is going to be the sum of the salary of all employees regardless of department. Okay, so we get the same thing that we get from our group by, but then just a little bit of extra. What would the sum of salary have been if we had not grouped by the department name? Okay, now we have two examples here of rolling up by more than one attribute. And hopefully we're all aware that we can group by multiple attributes, right? So if we wanted to group by department name and gender to find the sum of salary per gender within each department, we can do that. And we can also roll up our group by multiple attributes. And one thing to look out for here is that it actually does matter the order in which you specify these attributes when you're doing the roll-up, okay? Because these are answering two slightly different questions. When we roll up by department name and then gender within department name, okay, we have 6 tuples here that describe the each gender within the department, so females in risk and compliance and males in risk and compliance, and then risk and compliance regardless of gender. Okay, then our other department for female and for male, and then the department sum of salaries regardless of gender, and then the other department, female and male, and then the department sum of salaries regardless of gender, and then a final tuple here that is the sum of salary regardless of gender and regardless of department. Now, if we roll up by gender and then within gender department name, you see we get the tuples in a slightly different order. But additionally, what we see is instead of roll-ups of department name regardless of gender, we get a roll-up of gender regardless of department name, right? So this is slightly different than what we get in the other query where we rolled up by department name and then gender within department name. And then we do get this one final tuple that is the sum of salaries for all departments regardless, or the sum of salary for all employees regardless of department and regardless of gender. Okay, so just be aware that these are two slightly different questions that we are answering here. And then if you want kind of the best of both worlds, we can use our cube operator, which is going to give us all possible combinations of our roll-up operators. So regardless of if we roll up based on department name and then gender, or gender and then department name, when we use the cube operator, we get all possible combinations. So here is our sum of salaries for each department, for male, for female, and then the department regardless of gender, and then the gender regardless of department, and then the sum of all the sum of salary for all employees regardless of department and regardless of gender. Okay, so whereas previously we got 10 rows when we rolled up by department name and gender, and 9 rows when we rolled up by gender and then department name, when we do the cube operator, regardless of the order that we specify the attributes, we get the same 12 rows, just in slightly different orders. Our grouping function is a lot like that level pseudo column that we talked about in the last video, but the grouping function just tells us whether the tuple in question was generated by our group by or by the rollup. So we get a 0 if it was just part of the regular group by, and we get a 1 if it was generated by either the rollup or the cube operation. So just a little bit of extra information that we can use in our understanding of the data. And then here's an example of using that grouping function in conjunction with our decode operation that we talked about in a previous video, where we can use the output of the grouping function, and if this row was generated by our rollup down here, we're going to put a value of all departments. And if it wasn't, then we're just going to put the value of the department name. Okay, so this just helps us format our output to be a little bit nicer and more useful. So finally, the grouping sets extension is a lot like the cube operation, except it only returns what would come from the cube operation and not what would be returned by the group by. Okay, so now when we do this, we get all of our department names regardless of gender and our genders regardless of department name, but we don't have gender within department name. Okay, so just a slightly different way to get this output to answer a little bit different of a business question. So in these last couple of videos, I've gone kind of quickly, and that's because a lot of these advanced SQL queries are things that are a little bit more fringy and things that you would probably want to look up if you were going to be using them. So the core SQL stuff, the select, from, where, group by, order by, our aggregate functions, subqueries, inner join, outer join, these things are incredibly important. And if you're going to be using databases in any real way in business, that stuff, you need to just be able to have that roll out of your fingertips without even thinking about it. Some of these hierarchical queries and our rollup and our cube operators and things like that, you're not going to use, or at least I don't think you're going to be using every day in your normal operations. So we go through those a little bit more quickly. And when you're thinking about what to focus on for the exam, you know, really focus, don't spend a lot of time doing the hierarchical functions and things like that. I might show you a hierarchical function and ask you what's happening here, but I'm not going to ask you to write that from scratch. Rest assured, though, you will have to write some of our more basic SQL statements from scratch, right? Things that use select, from, where, doing our basic joins, things like that, doing subqueries. All of these things would be inbounds for what we do on the first exam. Of course, all of our functional dependencies and normalization up to and including Boyce-Codd normal form, which is in the last set of videos. Some of our single row character functions, so being able to do trim and do in-string and substring, those types of things would be good content for the second exam. And again, exam 2 is not comprehensive, so I'm not going to go back and specifically ask about anything that was on exam 1. However, you know, when we do things like joins, understanding these foreign key relationships is pretty important, right? And understanding what attributes are and how attributes are related to one another, like these are important things for really understanding the content for exam 2. So, you know, you've got to have a grasp on that, but and this slide is also in the slides that have already been posted to Blackboard, so you can review it in a little more depth there. But that's all I have for this set of videos, and I'm going to go ahead and get to work on the videos for the next module, so stay tuned for that.